Hello, I'm Russell Maynard, this is Bud Orr, and this is the Autococker video. When Bud first came out with this gun in 1991, I was one of the first players to get one. Since then, I've worked on thousands of autocockers. I've repaired them, maintained them, tuned them. There isn't any problem with the autococker that I can't fix with a few simple tools and some basic repair parts. The point is, if I can work on an autococker, anybody can work on an autococker. There's nothing mystery, magical, or beyond the abilities of the average player on the autococker. You don't have to be an engineer or designer like Bud. Every player who owns one should be able to fix it. Which brings us to the point of this video. The advantage I had is I know Bud, and Bud has shown me how to work on the gun, how to take it apart, how it functions, how to tune it, how to repair it, how to maintain it. That's the purpose of this video. Bud and I are going to take you through and explain how the gun works, how to tune it, how to maintain it, all those aspects. Bud, let's start by explaining how the autococker evolved from the sniper pump gun.
Well, this is one of the original sniper pump guns that you'd purchased back in late 80s and early 90s. And what I want to do is maintain the ability of shooting at long distance real accurately, having a closed bolt system, and constant velocity that the sniper at the time was really known for. Yeah. So what the sniper pump gun actually does, you pull back on the pump, okay, which in turn pull back on the cocking rod itself, and it allowed the ball to drop into the breech area, okay? And when you pull forward on the pump, the cocking rod stayed in the back position, the ball went up into the firing position, and then you pull the trigger. In order to come up with an idea, we wanted to keep the gun basically stock and make it interchangeable. If a guy wanted a pump gun or if he wanted a cocker, he could get one in, both guns in one purchase. So we took the cocking guide system for the pump itself. We took that and mounted a cocking system on it for most of the players.
So the auto-cocking system functions sort of like an automatic transmission. Instead of you pumping to cock it, it does itself, right, Bud?
Exactly.
Okay, we have a cutaway version of the autococker, and Bud's going to show you how the gun functions.
Okay, Russell, and the bottle is screwed into this area right here. This is called the bottom line. And it goes through the hose, goes up through the regulator system, into the air receiver, and right when it passes through the air receiver, it goes into the body of the gun itself. At that point, it's split into two directions. One goes to the cocking mechanism forward, and the other half goes to the firing mechanism and after part of the gun, or center part of the gun. All right. At the point that you pull the trigger, okay, all right, the cocking block goes in the aft position, okay, and at that point right there, the cocking lug, which is located on the hammer itself, catches on the sear at this point right here. All right, from that point forward, you release the trigger. All right, the ball is dropped into the breech area, which would be right in this area right here, and then it goes forward when you release the trigger. All right, now what makes all this happen is your cocking mechanism. All right, as we mentioned before, the CO2 is routed into the cocking block area, which goes into the regulator system, which goes into the three-way. Some people call it a three-way, some people call it a switch, but it's a directional flow valve. And what happens is CO2 comes in through this hose, which goes into the center part of the three-way. At that point there, the CO2 is routed to the forward part of the three-way, which actually goes into the back portion of the ram, which holds the bolt in a forward position. That's a closed bolt. All right, when you squeeze the trigger, all right, the trigger goes halfway back, okay, and fires. At that point, you notice the trigger movement right here. The three-way actuating rod does not move. That's the firing portion of it. We continue to move the trigger in the after position. Then what happens there is it moves the three-way. The three-way actually reroutes the CO2 from the forward hose to the after hose. And the after hose, at that point, charges the forward part of the ram, which starts the cycle all over again. It actually pushes the cocking block in the aft position, which starts the cycle and actually makes the gun ready to fire again. And release the trigger, reroutes the CO2, and goes forward.
Okay, bud, here's a brand new out-of-the-box autococker. Show me how to get it ready to play.
First thing you want to do is make sure your bottle's filled properly. You want to screw it onto the gun, like this. Okay, then you want to pull this forward, check for leaks, or listen for leaks, make sure that there's nothing leaking. You want to fire it a couple times. Look down in the breech area, make sure that the bolt's traveling far enough behind your feed tube that it doesn't pinch balls. Alright, next thing I do is I'll hold the three-way, just put pressure on it just towards the gun and make sure it fires before it cocks. This one's fine.
Okay, bud, let's look at these individually now. The first thing you did was check for leaks. Next, when you fired and cycled it, what adjustments were you checking there?
The adjustment on the back block to make sure that when you fired it, pull the trigger back, if you look down in the feed tube area, that the bolt itself is on the back side of the feed tube. At that point there, the ball can drop into the feed tube area and into the breech without hitting the bolt, and when you release it, put the ball into the breech area or move it forward into the barrel, then it won't pinch and break a ball.
Okay, so the bolt has to travel all the way back.
Right.
What about the cycling of the gun when you fire the trigger? What are you checking for there?
We're just making sure that the gun will actually fire prior to the gun cocking. So you want to hold this, pull the trigger, make sure it fires. Good, because if it fires and
okay, the cycle is it needs to fire just a moment before it cocks.
Right.
Rather than cocking before it fires.
Right, because if it cocks before it fires, and you got blowback problems,
yeah,
and we'll go into that later.
Okay, great. Okay, but when you fired it, cycled it a couple of times, what were you checking for there?
Well, I wanted to ensure that there's no double firing, what we call double firing. It's you have to pull it back twice actually before it cocks. And,
okay, what is the adjustment that you're dealing with then?
You'd be dealing with the cocking lug adjustment, which is part of the hammer assembly.
Okay. Okay, so if that SARE cocking lug is adjusted correctly, it'll cycle smoothly.
It'll cycle smoothly, and you won't get a double cock out of it. In other words, you'd have to pull the trigger back a couple of times before you get the cocking rod to actually stay in the aft position.
Okay. Now, okay, so the gun's ready to go, everything's functioning well on it. Probably the other adjustment I need to know about is the velocity, because when I go to play I may need to adjust velocity. How do you do that?
Well, first thing you got to do is, in order to check the velocity, what I usually do is to make sure I fire it before I start adjusting it. So I'll hold the three-way actuating rod, fire the gun, but I don't want it to cock. This will make it easy to remove the cocking rod. So I'll remove the cocking rod. I screw it in counterclockwise. Okay, remove it from the back block area. Now it'll just come out just like that. And then you insert your 3/16 Allen wrench in the back portion of the gun, and you'll feel it where it goes into like a hex area, and that's your adjustment. if you screw it in, okay, in a clockwise position, it allows the velocity to go up. If you need to change the velocity about, as long as you've checked it and you know that you've got to change it, let's say in the up position, it's shooting about 240, then I would turn it like 5 flat or 4 flats on Allen wrench. Allen wrench has 6 sides. You want to turn it on the just like 4 of them. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you reinsert the cocking rod back into the gun. Make sure when you're reinserting it that you take about the same amount of turns going in, and you don't cross-thread it. Because a lot of people have a tendency of cross-threading it. You screw it all the way in, and then snug it with your fingers. Don't take a wrench and put on, just snug it with your fingers.
Now we're going to show you how to disassemble and reassemble the autococker. These are the basic tools you'll need for it. This is a set of ball-headed Allens. The end allows you to get in an angle to remove the screws from the trigger frame. This is a 3/16 that you'll need to adjust the velocity. This T-handle is a 7/32. You'll need that for removing the air system off the front of the autococker. An adjustable wrench, a small set of needle nose pliers with the wire cutters. You'll need that for cutting the hose, and also a dental pick for removing O-rings. The specialized tools are a WorrGame product valve removal tool. You must have that. This is a ratchet wrench with a 1/4-inch 12-point socket. You need that size to remove the ASA system. And if you have an older version of the autococker, you're also going to need the caliper so you can measure the sear height. And of course you need some Loctite for sealing. Make sure you use the blue type, not the red. This is thread sealer, not thread lock. And a lube that is designed for air guns that won't eat away the O-rings. Okay, Bud, there are the tools. Show us how to take apart the autococker.
Okay, the first thing we're going to do is remove the barrel plug, then remove the barrel. You always want to remember to have the gun degas charged before you start working on it. Front cover's coming off. First thing we're probably going to remove here would be the trigger assembly. Going to use an 1/8-inch Allen wrench. Ball Allen, so you can go in, if you can see that it goes in on an angle. When you get the screws out, you want to make sure that you pull straight out and up to prevent you from bending the three-way actuating rod in assembly. That's a common problem when people just go ahead and yank the trigger assembly off and they go ahead and bend that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the beaver tail, same Allen wrench. Okay, now we're going to remove the cocking rod. Bolt pin, bolt, and cocking block comes off. If you don't remove the cocking block, what people mostly do is they'll take and they'll bend this up, and they end up bending the ram assembly. All right, now we're ready to take the bolt and or the hammer assembly out. What I usually do is screw the cocking rod back in, and then you'll pull it out as an assembly. the parts don't fall all over the place. Good thing to do prior to removing it is take your vernier calipers and measure the distance from the top of the body to the top of the cocking lug. I want to write that down somewhere. This is 60 thousandths. That's a number that you're going to have to deal with later on. Now we're going to take the cocking lug out. It's a little hard to turn because we do put Loctite on it. Very small amount of Loctite. I always want to remember that. Lay the cocking lug down. Now you pull it out as an assembly. Okay. Next thing you want to do, if you want to remove the valve assembly, you need the 5/32 Allen wrench, I think it is. Now this Allen set screw that we're removing right now, it's a plug, basically, because there's a hole that goes from the bottom of the trigger assembly all the way through from your valve assembly up into your bolt area, and we have to drill that, so now we have to plug it. Now we're going to take a handy dandy tool here, get up into the valve assembly, make sure that you get up in there pretty snug, turn it counterclockwise, break it loose, and usually you can screw it out by hand. I hold the gun up vertical usually like that, so the valve assembly comes out basically one piece. Okay, the next step is you're going to move the three-way actuating rod. You do this by removing one set screw, the one on the rod itself. A lot of times, rather than when you get your small Allen wrenches, don't use a ball to loosen it. We just snug it up and use a 90-degree angle one to tighten it, because you will snap the heads of them off. Don't lose that little Allen. Pull the three-way actuating rod out. Now we're going to disassemble and remove the ASA. This is where you have a special socket. 1/4-inch drive, 1/4-inch 12-point. About the only place I've found that you can buy them is through Snap-on, or Sears usually has them on the shelf. Okay, set that aside like this. Now we want to take the cocking system apart off of the gun. This is a special Allen. It's 7/32. It's long. It's going to go up in here and get the Allen, loosen it up, spin it off. Whoop. Okay. Now, total about 5 minutes. You got a bare body. The only thing left in it is your double feed, and that's it. Totally disassembled.
Okay, there you see. There's nothing to taking the autococker apart. It's a very simple, straightforward process. Now, there's a few pointers we're going to show you as Bud puts it back together that'll help you assemble it easier. Where do you want to start, Bud?
We're going to start with the valve assembly. Okay, there's various ways of putting them in. I found the easiest way is just take and don't assemble the nut in yet. Okay, you take the valve assembly, which this is your valve guide. Your valve goes in it, and then your spring usually hooks on the valve itself. Put that on your wrench, stick it inside the gun. Before I stick it in there, you'll notice there's a hole that goes through here. Okay, we're going to use that as a guide point. And I'll show you what I want to do. I'm going to stick this in there like this, and as you shove it up in the hole, you'll see the two holes that are in the valve guide itself. You'll only see one of them. I usually take my 3/16 Allen wrench, drop down in there to align that hole. Now I'll hold it. Just hold it with your thumb or finger like that. Come out here and grab the nut. Might have to tilt it up a little bit. Put it in there. Should start very easily by hand.
That's an important one, not to cross thread.
Yeah, you don't want to cross thread this because it's very easy to do, and it should, I mean, you just use your fingers. If you got to use a wrench to turn it more than you know, a half a turn, then you got a problem. Now you take the wrench, when you get pretty snug, take the wrench, look down inside there, and you can actually move it. Move the valve assembly by pushing it, shoving it from one side to the other. You want it in the center. You put the Allen in there like that, tighten it up. Okay. Sometimes you got to back it off. You don't really have to use, you know, a lot of muscle to tighten this because it is an O-ring seal. You want it snug, but you don't want to, you know, rip the threads off the body. Doesn't take a whole lot. Just snug it so it's tight. Don't wring it off. Look down in there, and the valve assembly might need a little bit of adjustment, which you can do. Adjust it, pull back. Now you got to take this plug, screw it down inside here. You make sure that it's below the surface of the gun. And just, you don't have to snug it. It's a plug. You could just sit there and just barely finger tighten it. Because if you tighten it too much, what you're going to do is push on the side of the valve guide assembly, and the valve will start leaking right off the bat.
Yeah, but it's important to get that screw all the way in, otherwise the trigger is going to drag across that Allen. So make sure it's just below the surface of the body.
Right. All right, next thing we can do is we can put the hammer assembly in. Okay, we're just going to slide it in. You can see where the Allen goes. Cocking lug. Put it in there like that. Come in here. Now what we're going to do is use blue Loctite. They need a little package. I'm going to use this package. And what I usually do, just put a drop on a piece of paper or something like that. Small amount. Okay, take the Allen wrench. Put the Allen on the cocking nut on the Allen. And just barely roll the tip of it in there. You don't want a lot of Loctite on this area. If it runs off into the bolt assembly, then we both have a problem. You'll get mad at me and send the gun back because it won't move because it's Loctite in place. You want the hammer assembly to move freely.
It's important to remember to use the blue Loctite. There's all kinds of different Loctites. The blue is a thread sealer, not a hard glue. If you use the red, which is a permanent sealer, you won't be able to remove your lug, and you won't be able to change the valve.
Okay, now the measurement we discussed earlier is 60 thousandths. See, this is, I went 20 thousandths past it, so now I got to back it off a little bit. This is your cocking lug adjustment. So we're going to move it probably, remember earlier I talked to you about moving things with flats of Allen. We're going to move this about 2 flats. That should be enough. Measure it again. Oop, that's 70. We're going to go 2 more flats.
Yeah, the lug height is really critical to set the timing of your gun. The lug has to be down far enough that it's going to catch the sear and cock every time. But if the lug is down too far...
60 thousandths.
Perfect. If the lug is down too far, the sear won't release it and the gun won't fire correctly.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave your cocking rod and assembly in right now. So the next thing we're going to do is put the air receiver back on. So we'll make sure that the O-ring is set in there nice and easily and in place. Sometimes you can put a little Vaseline on there to hold it in place. Okay, now there's a hole on the side of the air receiver right here. You want to face that towards the serial number side. Put the bolt in there.
Remember, that hole has to be on that side because that's where the three-way rod goes through to connect the three-way valve with the trigger assembly.
Sometimes this wants to be a little difficult. You definitely don't want to cross-thread this one. It wants to go in real easy all the way up to just before it gets, make sure that the O-ring's sitting in there nice, in place. Whoop. We do get clumsy once in a while.
That O-ring is critical when you put this in. If the O-ring isn't seated, as you screw it in, you can pinch that O-ring and tear the surface and it'll leak once the gun is assembled. So make sure that the O-ring is set down inside the ASA.
Okay, again, this is sealed with an O-ring, so you really don't want, you want to snug it pretty tight, but you don't want to wring it off because it is aluminum. It's pretty tough, but you can ruin it. All right, now, about ready to put the trigger assembly back on. We're going to disassemble the trigger assembly for you.
Yeah, take out the side plate and show them what the insides look like.
Okay, we're going to take off the grip assembly, at least one side. Okay, inside there you'll have a sear spring. A lot of people take and chop the sear spring. They do a lot of difficult things and make the timing off, and it's very important to keep the factory springs in there because they're at a certain tension. We've done a lot of research on it, and it has to be at that tension. Otherwise, it's going to throw the timing or the way the gun operates, especially the trigger pull. We're going to pop the sear clip off of the safety. It's on there pretty good, so.
Yeah, this is one of the first unauthorized modifications that most people make to the gun. They remove that safety and leave it off.
The safety is a very important thing. Take the clip off. Make sure there's a little ball and spring right here. Make sure you take the little spring out, and then the ball should follow. Sometimes this one's stuck in there with some Vaseline. There's your safety. Now we're going to have to loosen two little Allens. Take the trigger shoe off.
You can just back out these Allens a couple of turns. You don't have to pull them out of the trigger shoe all the way. Once you get to this point, the gun pretty well pops apart. The trigger will just slide
Okay, you
right
want
out.
to take the sear off. This is sear spring. It's got a tapered end to it. The tapered end goes actually down. Take the other grip side off. Where does the spring go?
There you go.
Okay.
You can see that it's well lubricated, so
Yeah,
it runs
we've put
smoothly
some
inside there.
Now, if you look right in here, you'll see that the trigger spring is right behind the trigger. It also has a tapered into it. The tapered end actually goes out, up towards the trigger itself. I don't know if you can see it, but one end of it's tapered, and that actually goes this way, which is out. Okay. Then you remove the pin. Sometimes these are real difficult, and I'm going to leave the sear assembly in there because you can see where it goes. But this is, you could beat it out with a hammer or whatever, but you know, we're going to leave it in.
Yeah.
There's no sense of, a lot of people polish these areas. I wouldn't recommend it because it has to be a certain shape and the angles of it has to be a certain way. We polish everything at the factory. We actually do a real nice trigger job on it at the factory. When it shows all these areas on this trigger itself is polished. Now, in order to put this back in, we want to slide the spring. Remember, taper part goes out. Boop. Slide that back in the hole. Okay. Now you want to take this trigger and drop it almost straight down. You'll catch the front of it, and you'll drop it straight down, and it'll go in on an angle like this. All right, it's very important at this point that you take the Allen, move this back far enough that the trigger can drop and the spring clears the front of the trigger. Now it's even with the top. That means that the spring's in the right position. At this point here, we take and put the safety back in it. It'll go in on the left or right side. Take and start the clip. C-clip. Just start it like that, and I usually take my pliers and just snap it into place. I checked inside, and the ball is still in there on this one. Put the spring back. Okay, that's the spring for the safety. Now we're going to put the sear spring back in. Taper part goes down. If you're holding it up like this, taper part goes over a little pin area that's on the trigger assembly. Now the trigger frame is basically together. Now if you see, I pull the grip assembly out because this little hex area goes all the way through the trigger frame. This trigger frame is carbon fiber, very strong. Now we're ready to put the other grip side on. Put that on, tighten it up. Remember, you snug it with the ball in and tighten it with the angle in. You have to tighten it snug. Now we're going to put our trigger shoe back on. Align it to where it fits you best, and just tighten these up. Now you don't have to tighten these real tight. You just snug them. Plenty good enough to hold it in place.
If you torque these screws too much, you'll snap the plastic trigger shoe, so be gentle when you tighten that down.
Okay. Now, here's a tricky part. You want to measure the top of the sear. Now, you don't want to push down on the sear itself. You just want to measure from the trigger frame top to the top of this. This is important to figure out your cocking lug depth. Okay, the way I figured, you got to listen to this one. It's 160 thousandths. Well, I ignore the 100, okay? Because you're always working with any number past 100. And that should be the depth from the top of this to the cocking lug. So we set it at 60. This is 160. 160 minus 100 is 60. So we set the depth here, and that's a good starting point. You should be almost right in on time on that. Now it's ready to put this back on, so let's put that. So we line everything up. We got 2 screws. Okay. If you notice, one screw is longer than the other. We'll hold them up like this. All right, the long screw goes up in front where the trigger is. Now you want to take your 1/8" Allen, go in there, line up the hole. There's another one that you don't want to strip. What you do is look at the back hole. If it's in alignment, the front one's going to be right there. Always, every time you start a screw, you sit there and you do it with your fingers, real lightly. If it doesn't go straight, you're going to strip it, then we'll have to helicoil it at the factory.
Yeah, that's the easy way to ruin a body, is to cross-thread it. Remember, the body is aluminum, the screws are steel. The screws are going to cut the aluminum if you don't align the thread holes correctly.
Right. And one of the reasons we put a short screw in the back, if you don't, it's going to hit your velocity adjuster. Now it's time to put we're going to put the cocking system back on at this point. The cocking system has what they call a banjo bolt. It's got a hole in it and a side hole in it, and that's where your CO2 comes from your air receiver through this and into your cocking mechanism.
Now, Bud, show them that there's two O-rings on that screw, front and back.
Yeah, there's
a lot of times they'll forget those.
Okay, this, unless you take the small hose off, you can't get to it. But if you'll notice that there is an O-ring right on the front of this screw, and there's one that goes into the back side.
Yeah, because that's an air system, so you have seals on both sides.
Right. You don't want to basically ever put them on dry either, because they'll wad up on you. You put a little lubricant on it. These already have lubricant on it, so we don't have to go to that point. All right. And we're going to start this back in the hole. Now, if you notice that the cocking rod, it's got a bend in it, okay? You want to put the bend towards the body. Put it in the slot. Again, make sure that it starts real free. And tighten it up. You can tighten it pretty snug. Now, at this point, what I usually do is make sure that the barrels start. Okay, some of your aftermarket barrels, if you notice our barrels, the ones we manufacture, have a relief area. Well, some of them are straight, you know, the same size all the way up. And if this cocking block is off a little bit, then that'll start your barrel to screw in here on a cross thread situation. So you can just sit there and grab it and move it back and forth a little bit. Or take a rubber mallet and just pop it. But usually it's dead on. Okay. And one thing that, you know, when you're a gunsmith, sometimes you forget things, and that's what I just did.
Oh, the three-way rod.
Yeah, the three-way actuating rod.
Actually, he's just testing me to see if I would notice.
I think Russell was sitting here kicking me under the table and wondering what he was mad about. Yeah. We're going to drop the assembly off again. We're going to slide our three-way actuating rod in here. Okay, you want to make sure that the screws are pointing out at you. And we're not going to tighten this one up right now. We're just going to start it. Because we're going to do some adjustments here pretty soon. So you just start it. Now we're going to slide the three-way actuating rod into the slotted hole. Now we're going to tighten this one up for good, hopefully.
Okay, as Bud is assembling the gun, he's also showing you how to set the adjustments on the gun. He's showing you the relationship and the timing adjustment for the lug and SARE. Now, once he puts the pistol grip frame on, he'll show you how to set the correct adjustment for the cocking block and the pump rod so that your bolt will have the correct amount of travel. And then he'll finish off by showing you how to tune the three-way.
Okay, we're going to take the velocity adjuster spring and back cocking rod off. All right, this is a very important adjustment. You want to make sure that the little dip in the cocking rod is facing towards the body, the low part. Pull the cocking rod or the pump rod back.
Make sure the ram is pushed all the way in.
Rams in towards the front of the gun. Start the cocking block. And you rotate it. Keep turning it in till it stops. Okay, right there. And what you want to do is you want to continue on until the bolt hole lines up. So you can put your bolt in it at that point. But we don't want to put it in just yet. And what that does, it keeps the ram from beating the back of the body out. In other words, it preloads the block instead of preloading the ram when it comes forward. What we're going to do is we're going to rotate this back a little bit. Make sure we don't bend it out. We're going to drop our spring in there. just barely start the cocking rod.
Make sure everything's aligned that way.
Yep.
Make sure the trigger's pulled. So
Make sure the trigger's pulled, otherwise the spring is going to be real difficult to operate. I'm going to line up the screw holes.
You can see with these angles, a ball-headed Allen is really a great tool to have. If you're using a straight Allen, it's hard to get in these nooks and crannies.
Tighten your beaver tail up, and you pull the cocking rod back out. Rotate this back into place. You can put your bolt in at this point. Now, when you put your bolt in, make sure that the hole is facing down for the air to travel up to actually blow the ball out. Put your pin in. Come back in and put your cocking rod back in place.
And there you go. Again, make sure you don't cross-thread the cocking rod.
As we talked earlier, this is very important. If it only goes like 1 or 2 turns, back it off and put some pressure on it until it clicks, and then start it again. And make sure that it keeps spinning. If it only tightens up about 1.5 turns, then it's not going in the bolt or the hammer properly.
Now that we've shown you how to disassemble and reassemble the gun, the final step, Bud is going to show you how to set the 3-way timing. Very critical.
Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my forefinger and hold the rod forward on the trigger frame, and I'm going to take and put my Allen wrench in the 3-way adapting collar, and I'm going to push it forward. So everything has to be in a forward position, and now you snug it up. Okay. This should be pretty well adjusted. Sometimes you have to fine-tune it, but this will get you home.
Okay, so to repeat, Bud, you push the 3-way collar all the way in.
All the way. It puts the 3-way collar all the way forward. Push the actuating rod all the way forward in the trigger assembly, and then tighten up the 3-way actuating collar.
That's your start point to set the timer.
Right. Okay, now we're going to slide the barrel in place. And we're going to put the barrel plug in. Now we're going to charge the gun up, the CO2.
And here we're checking again the same check down we went before. We're seeing, do we have any leaks? And we're going to test fire it to make sure that hammer, lug, and sear are timed correctly. Then he's going to fire and hold the trigger back to check the bolt. Yep.
Bolt seems to be adjusted properly.
Okay, now he's going to feather the trigger to make sure the gun fires before it cocks.
Fired. Fired. Fired.
Looks great.
Sounds
all right.
Good.
If you have a problem with your autococker, 9 times out of 10, it isn't that the gun needs new parts, it's that you're out of adjustment. Now, we've already shown you how to adjust the autococker, but I've shown you how to adjust the autococker as we reassembled it. If you need more emphasis, every autococker comes with one of these manuals. In the manual, there are sections on how to make all the adjustments with diagrams like this that shows you the lug sear height, as well as a blown-out schematic of the gun and its parts, and then a large section in the back, several pages of troubleshooting. This covers the most common problems that people run into with the autococker and how to solve it. There's another area, though, that people seem to have a lot of problems with the autococker. That's regarding velocity. And often it isn't the gun. Bud, explain to them what's going on.
Well, there's 2 areas, CO2 restriction and also ball size. CO2 restriction during rapid fire causes the velocity to drop off quickly, and the ball size. The ball is too small, then it rolls down the barrel, and you'll notice about a 60 feet per second variation in fluctuation of velocity.
Okay, on the CO2, that's usually a problem with the valve actually in the bottle, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it's usually there's a restriction either where the valve screws into the CA adapter, they got it too close, so back off about a quarter of a turn. If it helps, then that's the problem area.
Yeah. So you need to check your fittings on your CO2 valve, on the actual valve in the bottle, and make sure that the airflow is going well into the gun. If you shoot a string and you notice your velocity drops steadily, that's a CO2 restriction. Now, what were you saying about the paintball size and how that affects velocity?
Well, paintballs vary in sizes quite a bit nowadays, and like I say, if you breach a ball and the ball rolls part way down the barrel, then you will, when you fire it at that point, then you're going to notice quite a variance in velocity.
Okay, yeah, it depends on how the seam aligns in the barrel. Well,
yeah, they're like eggs. They're not perfectly round.
And the solution to that is to match the paint to the type of, to the ID or interior diameter of the ball you're shooting, of the barrel you're shooting. So that's a question of changing barrels or changing paint so it matches up.
Right.
Yeah. The best way to avoid problems with your autococker is to maintain it. But what are the big threes there?
Big three is clean it, lube it, and change the valve. First of all, when you need to clean the gun, you get the dirt and grime out of it. It does two things: keeps the gun functioning properly, and it keeps the wear down on it. You should lube it about 2 drops of oil in the air receiver area once or twice a day. And the valve assembly is good for a couple 100,000 rounds.
All right. That's pretty much all there is to it. Just keep it clean and lube it, and it'll keep running.
Yep.
In the 9 years that Bud has been making the autocockers, it's become one of the most popular guns on the market. Just about everybody, every aftermarket manufacturer makes some kind of accessory for it. It can get confusing. There's so much out there it can get confusing. But explain to us, what are the accessories that you recommend for an autococker?
Well, first thing I'd recommend is this is a typical cylinder that most people get when they first buy an autococker. It's a CO2 cylinder. And when the cylinder is filled, it's filled to 68% of its liquid capacity. That means that the liquid's filled up to about this area here. Now, if you use it without an anti-siphon tube on the valve itself, then when you lay on it sideways, the CO2 would normally go down the into the valve and get into the gun. So what we do is install an anti-siphon tube. Now you can get this at most dealers, and it should be installed by a professional. And what it does is when it's screwed onto the gun, the tube actually points up. So when the bottle's laying on its side, the liquid's here, and the tube actually goes up into the upper area of the cylinder laying on its side and extracts gas instead of liquid from the cylinder. It's installed this way right here. All right, now you'd have to mark the cylinder to indicate where it should be installed on the gun. So what we do is install the valve onto the gun itself, and then we'll install the tube onto the valve itself, and then we'll go ahead and install it into the cylinder with the proper Loctite and torque to the proper specifications. And then you mark it. If you can see right here, there's a little X on the cylinder itself. That means that should be in the up position when the cylinder is installed on the gun.
But what are the problems with getting liquid CO2 into the autococker?
It gives you hot shots. The liquid gets up into the valve chamber area, and naturally liquid's going to expand quicker in the valve chamber area, and when you fire it, it's going to have higher pressures in your valve chamber area.
And liquid also will freeze up the autococking mechanism.
Oh, it'll freeze up the cocking mechanisms in the front.
Okay. So once you get an anti-siphon system, if you're running CO2, what are the other accessories you recommend for the autococker?
The next accessory would be your regulator. This is a regulator that we designed for the autococker. Liquid, it does shut off to prevent liquid from going in there also, in addition to the cylinder itself with the anti-siphon on it. And this comes on the gun. Now the reason it doesn't have a bottom line is because people choose to either go remote, they'll go the CO2, or the new crave in the industry right now is compressed air. So this will actually handle all three items. So.
Now, there's a lot of expansion chambers and regulators on the market. What are the features and benefits between expansion chamber and an inline regulator?
Well, expansion chambers are originally designed for cold weather use. It allows an area for if the liquid happens to get out of the bottle into or headed towards the gun, then it gives an area for the CO2 to lay in and vent off to produce gas to fire the gun. Yeah. With this system here, you don't need it really, because there's an expansion chamber actually in the upper portion of the regulator itself.
Yeah. And the big feature about the regulator is that whatever the pressure is coming into the regulator, going into the gun, it is a controlled pressure.
Yeah, it's a consistent pressure. It usually goes in, the factory sets them anywhere from 575 pounds, and it stays there. In other words, the gun, that's all the pressure it ever sees, where if you got CO2, you know, the pressure varies in a CO2 cylinder quite a bit, depends on the outside temperature, and this would make it consistent.
Yes. So you get more shots, you get a very regulated velocity because the pressure is the same in the gun each time.
Every shot, it's always the same.
Okay. Okay, so we've covered first get an anti-siphon system. Make sure that if you're running CO2, you have anti-siphon. Next, get the inline regulator to control the pressure of the gas coming into the gun. Okay, now once you've done that, that's when you can start working on lighter springs and adjusters like that, right?
Right.
Here's show them what we mean here, bud. Here's a lightweight hammer spring setup. Explain that.
Whenever you get controlled pressure in there, then you can go with a spring kit such as this one right here. And it actually has a lighter hammer. I'll get it there in a minute. Has a lighter hammer, has a larger spring, but softer spring, and it has a varying velocity adjuster on it. Right, when you install these and you can actually get consistent pressure going into the gun, then this will actually increase your shots, and it'll make it so that you can actually go to lower pressure on your cocking system.
Yes.
And that in turn gives you a lighter trigger pull.
Yeah, the lightweight spring reduces the pressure that it takes
to cock the system on the ram itself.
So that lightens up the three-way rod and the trigger pull.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another accessory that it's available through you at WorrGame Products. Explain what this does.
Okay, this is an adjuster that we can actually put on the sledgehammer regulator, and what this does is adjust it within about a 60-pound area. So when you install this and you want to really fine-tune your cocking system, you know, so it has a lighter cocking pressure on it, then you can screw in it and actually turn down the cocking pressure, let it out, and or screw it counterclockwise, and it'll increase or decrease the cocking pressure.
Okay, so it replaces this front cap.
Right.
The hose connects just like that.
It would go, you'd remove this front cap right here, and you'd unscrew that in its place.
Okay. And then you have finger adjustment so you can fine-tune it. Makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so you've got, we've talked about the anti-siphon system, we've talked about inline regulator, having an adjustment on the cocking ram, and the lightweight hammer and trigger system. Now, Bud, show them on the new 98 version. What are the other features that you've incorporated into it?
Okay, 98 version, we've actually come up with a little cosmetic changes. We got our own satin finish. We actually modify your sight rail itself. And we also, the biggest thing is we put stainless steel cocking rods and pump rod on it. And also we got an adjuster, so you can actually adjust your cocking lug from the top.
So you
got to
don't need-
remove the bolt and then go ahead from the top and adjust your cocking lug.
So
And
you
that's
don't-
basically your timing of the gun.
Okay, you don't have to remove the grip assembly
Yeah, you
anymore.
know, the old way is you move the grip, and you used to use the calipers and measure the sear height, and now we eliminated that by going with a through hole.
Yeah. Now you also have gone to the composite grip frame on this gun, right?
Yes, we have the carbon fiber grip frame on this one, this model on the 98s.
Yeah. And what about the spring system? The 98 version has a lightweight spring setup already in it.
It has basically a real similar spring to this one right here. They call them a null spot kit. Has a lighter hammer, has also a different velocity adjuster that's actually thinner, and is actually this is a velocity adjuster here, and you can see it by cocking the gun open and looking inside it. And when you look inside, you'll see that there's a brass adjuster in there. That means it is a 98. The hammer weight is lighter also.
All right.
And that's all the accessories that come stock on the gun.
Yeah. So
Plus
most
the
of
wraparound grips also.
yeah. Well, most of the accessories that people have been making, such as the beaver tail guard and different bolts, those are now available on the 98 version.
Yes.
Show them the STO now. The STO is your tournament-ready upgrade to the 98 Autococker.
Yeah, this is what I call our hot rod. You know, all the parts in it are fine-tuned. All the clearances in it are right to the maximum of the allowable. It's got a vertical drop. Okay, the bolt itself, nickel-plated. It's got our own type of deflection device in the end of it.
Yeah.
So you can,
Yeah, like a Venturi system
Yeah.
to open the
and then
gas.
it comes with all your stainless steel accessories, a carbon fiber grip, it comes with a brass trigger shoe. It's all tuned. Trigger job's already on it.
Now, I noticed that the autococking system in the front, this is, it's anodized, it's aluminum parts, and all these are hand polished and...
Yeah, it comes with, instead of a brass three-way, it comes with aluminum three-way, all polished, and interior and exterior. Comes with, instead of a brass ram, it also comes with a aluminum ram also, which is polished, highly polished on the inside.
I notice a lot of custom milling on it too, so
Right.
people can spot in the STO logo on it.
It's definitely a hot rod. You pull it out of the box and go play any tournament in the world. And I stand by it.
But for people who have older versions of the Autococker, where can they get all these accessories?
Okay, you can go to your local dealer or distributor, or you can even send it into the factory, and we'll be glad to update it to all of the new equipment that we manufacture for the gun.
Yeah, okay. Well, that covers the most of the accessories that are available for the Autococker. The other big area that we're starting to see now is high pressure gas systems. Is there anything that needs to be done to the Autococker to make it ready for high pressure gas?
Well, the 98 Autococker comes so you can use it with gas, compressed gas, or that's this version right here. It comes from the factory, so you can use either one. The STO naturally is, you can use either one, but the older versions, if you happen to go to a compressed air system, then you need inline regulator, and you also need some internal parts changed on it, i.e. the hammer weight and springs, and a lot of work has to be done to it, boring out the chamber area and get more volume in the chamber area.
Is that something that you do at the factory? Can they send the guns in for that work?
Yeah, it's got to be done at the factory or an authorized WorrGame product airsmith.
Right.
It's not something that you would really want to do yourself, because if it's done improperly, then it causes you more grief than it's worth.
And it's also dangerous. They can
Right.
change the safety requirements.
We know just how much to bore things out, and the dimensions do change, where if you miss one dimension, it'll make the gun not work properly.
Okay. That's it. That's the Autococker video. I hope that it gave you all the information you need to feel comfortable working on your gun and accessorizing it, taking it apart and putting it back together.